Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in 2 minutes. So for those who are in the back, if you could take seats, please, and come forward if you don't mind, close. Welcome. Good morning and welcome to Siena University's second annual symposium, Earth's Cry, Humanity's Call, co-sponsored by the School of Business, the Spirit of 68 Committee, and the Laudato Si Center for Integral Ecology. We're grateful for all of you who are present here today and the other sessions that will come later, to our students here at Siena, faculty, the administrators, staff, members of the Board of Trustees, Siena alumni, friends of our university, members of the Catholic Diocese of Albany, the Justice and Peace Committee, and in a special way to the students from several high schools, Catholic high schools in the diocese. I'd like those coming from the Catholic high schools to please stand so we can recognize you. Please stand. Thank you. We welcome one of the other faith leaders from the Capital Region who might be present now, who will come later, and others who will join with us in the search for positive, necessary solutions to the existential crisis of global warming and climate change. A special welcome to those also who are joining us online. In a document entitled Laudato Si, published in 2015 by the late Pope Francis, speaking to the entire world, he reminds us that we, each of us, have a special responsibility to respect, to care, promote the dignity and the well-being of each and every person and the dignity of the natural world, creation. The Pope speaks about business as a noble vocation, a calling to promote the common good, where profit is in service to human development and the promotion of the well-being of the environment. It's from this same document that the Laudato Si Center for Integral Ecology here at Siena University derives its mission and its identity. the promotion of a holistic vision of the interconnectedness of everything, human and non-human, linking the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. The symposium series is an expression of a larger identity contained in the mission of our university, linked with Catholic social teaching and the values of the global Franciscan movement. Now, I don't know, for those of you who are music lovers, I'm sure some of you have heard of an artist, Billie Eilish. Has anybody ever heard that name? In her song, All Good Girls Go to Hell, Eilish paints a dark, apocalyptic, almost hopeless picture of the destruction of the environment by human beings. Hills burn in California, my turn to ignore you. Don't say I didn't warn you, all the good girls go to hell. But even in the darkest moments of her song, Eilish does not lose hope in humanity for change. She tries to wake us up and to shake us up before it's too late. Today's program, Reimagining Economy for People and Planet, seeks to deepen awareness of the urgent existential, environmental, economic challenges that we are facing as human beings together. It encourages us to examine a set of ethical principles and practices flowing from a Franciscan approach to economy that might serve as a moral compass and review, and it also today is an effort to review the best practices related to integral community development and societal impact that promote the flourishing and the well-being of human beings while protecting and safeguarding the dignity of the natural world. Perhaps the message of the symposium is that not all good girls or boys, men or women, go to hell. There is cause for hope, and each time we choose to do something positive for one another and for the planet, we are bringing hope to the world. And now it is my distinct honor to welcome to the podium the Dean of the School of Business, Dr. Rashmi Asudani, with whom our center has been working for nearly 1 year developing the vision and program for this year's symposium. Welcome, Dr. Asudani.
Thank you, Brother Perry, for your very kind introduction. My name is Rashmi Asudani, and I'm the Dean of the School of Business. Good morning to all of you. It's been an incredible opportunity for the School of Business to support this year's symposium on reimagining economy for people and planet. I want to talk a little bit about the School of Business. The School of Business has a prestigious distinction to be accredited by the AACSB. For context, only 6% of business schools globally hold this accreditation, which sets the highest standards for business education. And the School of Business here at Siena, what makes the School of Business here at Siena so special is that our School of Business curriculum embeds Siena's unique Franciscan mission, emphasizing ethics, community, and compassion. Our societal impact plan that focuses on the regional economic development and community development is activated by our engaged faculty and our students. I look forward to our work in developing and enhancing business education as a force for good, and I repeat, business education as a force for good in the region, in the nation, and globally, one person at a time, one unit at a time. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our distinguished speakers for making time to be with us. Thank you to President Seifert and Provost Marin for your ongoing support. Thank you to my colleagues, faculty, staff, and students. I deeply appreciate all of you for your continued engagement with us in the School of Business to advance our strategic priorities, including the Societal Impact Plan. And thank you to the Laudato Si Center for giving us the opportunity to partner this year. And last but not the least, there's an entire steering committee. I just happen to be one name there. There's an entire steering committee that has been working throughout the year to make this happen, to develop a vision, to help develop a vision, and to activate the vision into what we're going to see today. Thank you to all of you, and to the School of Business representatives on this committee, Elena Isaacson, Jim Murtaugh, and Arinda Mandal as well. Thank you, and have a great day today.
One of the critical elements of recognizing our connectedness with the earth and with the earth community is to recognize we're standing on land that belonged to other peoples before us who had a very different understanding of the communion with the natural world. I'd like now to invite Davina to come forward, please, and to share with us a short thought.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. As Brother Michael Perry had mentioned, that we do stand on very important ancestral land that we should acknowledge before we start this beautiful program today. So we acknowledge here at Siena University the traditional lands of the Mohican and the Mohawk people, both past and present. And with gratitude, these nations who continue to be caregivers of this ancestral land as they have been for generations. This recognition calls for not only the Siena community, but the larger community to learn from the indigenous people in caring for our lands, waters, for future generations. Brother Perry had mentioned that high schoolers are here today. You are the future generations. So you are taking a monumental step today to see and learn more about how we can be stewards of this earth. And as we continue to be stewards of the earth, we must also come to learn the injustices of displacement, forced assimilation, and strive to honor the indigenous perspective and language and culture. It is not about having one group against another, but coming to learn from each other and how we can take care of the land together. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite President Chuck Seifert to come up and say the opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It is wonderful to see so many people, and I'm so happy that we have such a cross-section, wonderful cross-section of our community that's joining us both in person and online. So thank you all for being here. It is absolutely my honor to address you. This is a conversation that is not only timely, but it's also essential. At Siena, we understand that integral ecology is not an abstract concept. It's a way of seeing the world, a way that recognizes the deep interconnectedness between people, the planet, and purpose. And that perspective is so deeply rooted in our Catholic and Franciscan values and mission. See, St. Francis of Assisi viewed the earth not as a resource to be exploited, but as a sacred living gift that sustains and nurtures all life. And that exact vision continues to fuel everything that we do at Siena. Both Pope Francis and Pope Leo have passionately spoken about the climate crisis as a moral crisis, one that disproportionately harms the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable, and with those people with the fewest resources to adapt. Climate justice demands that we look honestly at our systems we've created and ask whether they truly serve human dignity and the common good. That question sits at the very heart of today's symposium, Reimagining an Economy for People and the Planet. Economics and ecology are simply inseparable, and we must envision an economy rooted in fairness, justice, long-term sustainability, and respect for human dignity. As you attend the sessions today, I'm going to challenge you to listen to the speakers and presenters, but don't act passively. Try to identify ways that you can engage and calls to action in order for you to implement many of the different factors we talk about today. Siena, as an institution, is proudly taking action. We are striving to lead by example in how we operate and the choices we make. I'm proud to share that Siena has entered into 2 community solar agreements that will supply approximately 90% of the electricity that we consume, and it will be replaced with renewable energy. Also, just this morning, I reviewed, and later this afternoon, I will sign the final contract that will make 100% of our electricity coming from renewable sources. These agreements will save Siena over $100,000 annually while also significantly reducing our carbon footprint. They directly advance the vision set forth by our Board of Trustees in its 2024 resolution on sustainability and ecological conversion, integrating environmental stewardship and financial responsibility. This symposium is not a one-off event. It began in the fall of 2024 and reflects ongoing commitment to education, action, and leadership in climate justice on our campus and far beyond. I want to extend my sincere thanks to the Laudato Si Center, the School of Business, the Spirit of 68, all for sponsoring today's gathering, and to everyone who helped make this symposium come to life. Siena graduates leaders intent on making the world a better place. But leadership doesn't only happen in the classroom and the boardrooms. It happens in our homes, in our communities, and everyday decisions that we all make. Together, Siena can be a better institution, standing up for our planet and for those most vulnerable to climate change. Thank you again for being a very important part of this conversation, and welcome to the symposium. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Leslie Dane, a sophomore history major, a member of the women's swim and dive team, and a student worker for Laudato Si Center for Integral Ecology. Leslie will be moderating our first session and introducing our first speaker of the day. Please join me in welcoming Leslie Dane.
Good morning, everyone. And again, welcome to this year's Earth's Cry Humanity's Call Symposium, Reimagining Economy for People and Planet. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, Bishop John Stowe. Bishop John Stowe joined the formation program for the conventual Franciscan province of Our Lady of Consolation at St. Bonaventure Friary in St. Louis, Missouri. Bishop Stowe completed his BA in 1990 at St. Louis University and a master's in divinity and licentiate in church history from the Jesuit School of Theology, Berkeley, California. He served as pastor in El Paso, where he was later named chancellor. He was elected vicar provincial for his Franciscan province in southern Indiana in 2010. In 2015, he was named by Pope Francis, the third bishop of Lexington, Kentucky. He currently serves as the bishop president of Pax Christi USA, continuing his history of work in peace, justice, and care for our common home. Please join me in welcoming Bishop Stowe.
Thank you very much. It really is a delight to be here and be part of this symposium on such an important topic. It's really great to see business and integrity of creation coming together here at Siena University. Congratulations on bringing this together for the second year in a row. The 800th anniversary of St. Francis' Canticle of the Creatures was also the 10th anniversary of Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si. Our first Latin American and first Jesuit pope took the name of the poor man of Assisi almost spontaneously when he was elected in 2013. It was the suggestion of the Brazilian Cardinal Claudio Humes, a Franciscan, seated next to Francis in the conclave that elected him, who simply told then Cardinal Bergoglio, "Do not forget the poor." That inspired a choice that was truly prophetic, the name Francis. Very early in his pontificate, Pope Francis announced his preference for a poor church among the poor. He brought to the chair of Peter the whole legacy of the Latin American church and how its regional conference of bishops realigned the institutional church consistent with its preferential option for the poor. Pope Francis frequently spoke to us about the peripheries, the margins, and the excluded over the course of his 12-year papacy. He also strove to bring Catholic social teaching from the margins of the church to its center. He taught us the importance of the interrelatedness of all that the Church teaches. Cardinal Turkson dubbed it integral Catholic social teaching, as well as the interrelatedness of the social problems of the Church and the world, which must be faced together. The 2015 encyclical Laudato Si has largely been described as an encyclical on climate change or on the environment, but as you know here, the encyclical is actually much broader in scope and adapts the terminology and the approach of integral ecology. The Holy Father applied the spirituality and the vision of Francis of Assisi's poetic song of the praise for all creation to the contemporary ecological crisis. He makes an appeal for all of humanity to work together for more integrated living and for the preservation of our common home. Pope Francis contrasts the present state of the planet, which he describes with alarming terminology, a pile of filth, to the joyful exuberance of Francis of Assisi's embrace of all creation and all humanity. The Pope invites all people to a renewed appreciation for the wonders and beauty of creation and a deepened understanding of the interconnectedness of all life and all creation. The name Laudato Si comes from the repeated phrase in the canticle itself, which celebrates how all creation praises the Creator. The canticle is sung in harmony by all of creation, each element glorifying God in its own distinct way, and each relating to all the others. For Pope Francis, this hymn of his namesake points to a way of understanding integral ecology which downplays the historic anthropocentrism so prominent in the Judeo-Christian tradition. But it doesn't set care for the creation, care for the environment in opposition to the flourishing of the human person, the crown of creation made in the image and likeness of God. Cardinal Peter Turkson, responsible for introducing that encyclical to the world, referred to the original canticle of St. Francis as a doxology, a hymn of praise. This same spirit of praise is found in the encyclical Laudato Si as well. A common reading of God giving dominion and authority over all creation to Adam in the book of Genesis has allowed for an attitude of human license to use and exploit all that the earth and all that creation have to offer without concern for the destruction and the depletion of natural resources. In his encyclical, Pope Francis invited the whole world to consider the earth as our common home, and he engages the familial language employed by St. Francis describing our sister, Mother Earth. The disturbing introduction of the encyclical tells us that our sister is hurting, has been plundered, and is calling out. The Pope speaks of the human sin and violence manifest in the abuse of soil, water, air, forms of life, and the problem of basic human forgetfulness that we ourselves are made of earth, according to the book of Genesis. Following the lead of his predecessors in the era of the Second Vatican Council, Francis follows the example of John the 23rd, who reached out to the world beyond the church when the threat of nuclear destruction was a pressing and a unified response was needed. He follows the lead of Paul VI, who warned about the exploitation of nature and the consequences of unchecked human activity. Pope Paul said that we must ensure that moral progress advances in tandem with industrial, scientific, and technological progress, or these very advances will become destructive. Pope John Paul II warned against the excessive consumption, which he calls dangerous for human ecology, and he called for the conversion of lifestyles as well as the means of production and models of production and consumption and the power structures that are in place. Francis uses the basic instincts and the breadth of the canticle to pursue those issues more fully. His immediate predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, said that models of economic growth which do not respect the natural environment must be corrected. He saw the relationship that exists among environment, life, sexuality, family, social relations, and more, and argued that both the natural and social environments have been gravely damaged by irresponsible human behavior without accountability to the Creator. Without using the terminology, it could be said that Pope Benedict described integral ecology. For Pope Francis, the alternative to the lack of accountability to the Creator that Pope Benedict bemoaned is to be found in the example of St. Francis, who was able to unite his care for the vulnerable with a care for creation lived joyfully and a tenderness which is the antidote to the globalization of indifference. Pope Francis's sad characterization of the world that would pay more attention to the drop of a single point in the stock market than to the shipwrecked lives lost off the island of Lampedusa, the port of entry to Europe. As Leonardo Boff notes, it was in the year before his death when St. Francis composed his famous poem which expresses a vision of integral ecology. Most high, all-powerful, all-good Lord, yours are the praises, the glory, the honor, and all blessing. To you alone, Most High, do they belong, and no human is worthy to mention your name. In these first two verses, Francis is exuberant in his praise of God the Creator, so far above and distinct from creation, even from humanity, which is made in God's image and likeness. The superlative forms of the adjectives in the original Italian attempt to address and describe God, insufficient as words are, and further accentuate the exceptionalness of God and what is owed to God: praise, glory, honor, and blessing. Like John the Baptist, who recognized his own unworthiness to even untie the sandal strap of the Messiah, no human is worthy of mentioning the name of the Eternal One. The non-material goods of praise, glory, honor, and blessing belong to the Creator alone. For anyone to seek such praise and glory for oneself is to have things out of right order and therefore sinful. Praised be you, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially Sir Brother Sun, who is day and through whom you give us light, and he is beautiful and radiant with great splendor, and bears a likeness of you, Most High One. In these verses, we come to the explicit notion of God as creator, maker of many creatures who share in his praise. With all your creatures, you are praised. As Genesis' first account of creation begins with the separation of day and night, the separation of the lights of the sky, so does Francis' canticle. Sir, brother, son, is both noble and familiar, both sir and brother. He is identified with day and the bringer of light. The sun reflects a beauty that cannot be contained, that gives of itself, radiating outward, and is so like God the Most High. But the sun itself cannot be seen directly, face to face. The sun is the most high of all creatures. It is self-giving and outward-oriented like the Creator himself. Praise be you, my Lord, through sister moon and the stars. In heaven you formed them clear and precious and beautiful. Even the night has lights, the lesser lights, the feminine moon and the stars, also formed by the Creator, also radiating outward, also beautifully reflecting their Maker, the Lord who is to be praised. Moon and stars can more easily be gazed upon in wonder than the sun, from whom one shields one's eyes. It is their beauty, more than their usefulness as a source of energy for humans, that is, their reflection of the Most High. Praised be you, my Lord, through brother wind and through the air, cloudy and serene, and every kind of weather, through whom you give sustenance to your creatures. More inanimate creatures are described here. The atmosphere. The wind is a brother who carries air that allows us to breathe. The weather is praised for sustaining all creatures. The face of creation changes based on the conditions of brother wind and weather, yet these two are giving of themselves and useful to other creatures. Praise be to you, my Lord, through sister water, who was very useful and humble and precious and chaste. No specificity is described in terms of the usefulness of water, but we all know there is no life without water. And as the Tao teaches, water is humble. It always seeks the lowest place, but in its persistence, it can wear away rock. Water is precious, the life-giving and chaste in its clarity and purity. It is translucent. Praised be you, my Lord, through brother fire, through whom you light the night, and he is beautiful and playful and robust and strong. Another source of light in the night, brother fire is strong and playful creature, nearer to earth than the sun and moon, more capable of damage or more capable of providing useful heat to cook food or warmth for the body. It's also a delight to the eye at night. This brother, too, glorifies God by giving of itself in service. And despite its playfulness, it is also strong and capable of great usefulness or great damage to other creatures. Praise be you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruits with flowers and herbs. The sister who sustains and governs us, whom Pope Francis described as hurting and plundered, even though she willingly gives all she has. Sister Mother Earth both sustains and governs us, not quite under our dominion as Francis sees it, because her seasons and patterns, rules and rhythms can govern the rest of creation. Yet she provides us with what is beautiful to taste and to sight. The praises of all these creatures celebrate their familial relationship with each other and with us. They serve human beings and give freely to the common good of nature and humanity. But each gift that is offered can be exploited, and when out of balance, can cause harm. The sun can burn skin when not respected, and now we know that it can cause skin cancer as well. The moon controls the tides, and if not respected, can lead to drowning. Brother wind can become a hurricane or tornado, and sister water can flood and overwhelm when things are not in balance. Mother Earth can govern and sustain, but can also withhold her fruits in famine and be poisoned by abuse. We now see all these elements of nature as sources of renewable energy to power what humans need for thriving and for what technology demands. Sun, wind, and water can be harnessed for energy to support and sustain the creativity of people. Fire can be controlled and put to work for human production. The cosmic harmony celebrated in this poem extends to all humanity, not only as beneficiaries of nature, but those who know that certain behavior is godlike, such as to give pardon and to bear difficulties, an endurance that will be divinely rewarded. Forgiveness and patient suffering restore balance to the universe. Death, too, is a creature and a sister in relation to us. She will come and is not to be feared if all else is in right relationship. Praise and bless my Lord and give him thanks and serve him with great humility. It is that humility which acknowledges our rightful place as a creature among creatures in relationship with all other creatures and with the Creator. Now, according to Leonardo Boff, Francis' love of creation is part of his vision of a world renewed by the death and resurrection of Jesus. Human beings can opt to use and abuse the gifts of creation, and we can opt to use and abuse each other. History is full of such examples. Or we can opt to see the divine harmony amongst all creation and the intent for harmony among all people. And we can glorify God for the blessing of participating in this marvelous creation. In Laudato Si', Pope Francis not only holds up the witness of St. Francis as a sign of what is possible, he also describes the consequences of not living in right relationship with creation and each other. He describes the decline in the quality of human life and the breakdown of society. Humans are affected by environmental destruction, the growth of congested cities without green spaces affecting the quality of life. Too many natural spaces have become privatized with controlled access. Social exclusion, inequitable distribution and consumption of energy, social breakdown, increased violence and social aggression, drug trafficking, drug use, and the loss of identity are all consequences of unbalanced living. And the late Pope is quick to add that the omnipresence of media and the digital world as a boundless source of information is increasingly replacing the pursuit of wisdom and even the capacity to think deeply. The noise and distractions of information entertainment overload and create mental pollution. Constant use and consumption of things and ideas can also spill over into human interaction. Pope Francis lamented the cheapening of relationships as another form of greater impoverishment. Worse still is the idea that people, like obsolete items, can be discarded when not useful. Ecological destruction is intimately connected to global inequality. The powerful disregard the needs and concerns of the majority of the Earth's population and then suggest that the impoverished nation should lower their birth rates for the sake of greater sustainability on the planet. Even, the Pope says, as 1/3 of all food produced goes to waste. We often hear about what the developing nations owe in debt to global finance and to the wealthier countries. Pope Francis points out that what we do not hear about is the ecological debt between North and South, based on the commercial imbalances and disproportional use of resources by the wealthiest and most advanced nations. He warns that results from overconsumption by the developed world have the most immediate and drastic effects on the developing world. Corporations pollute in poor countries in ways they would not be permitted to do in richer countries. Poorer countries fuel the development of richer countries, yet they are controlled by the weight of their debt. Quote, "We need to strengthen the conviction that we are one human family. There are no frontiers or barriers, political or social, behind which we can hide. Still less is there room for the globalization of indifference." Creation, Francis reminds us, means more than nature. Creation implies God's loving plan. While nature can be studied and controlled, creation is a gift. The world was brought about by a decision of God, and all creation is an expression of the Father's love. While filled with marvels and wonders, nature by itself is not divine. Human beings have the capacity to apply intelligence to positive development in terms of forging right relationships with nature, or continue to experience new ills and levels of suffering because we remain out of balance. Faith, however, teaches us that God can bring good even out of the evil humans have done. The Pope argues that human beings possess a uniqueness not fully explained by evolution. Personal diversity, personal relationships with God lie beyond much ability to explain scientifically. But other beings are not merely to be used and dominated. Jesus taught harmony, justice, fraternity, and peace. And the ultimate purpose of all creatures is not found in us, but in God. Pope Francis laments in his encyclical what he calls the technocratic paradigm. Without denying the benefits of technology or expressing a desire to reverse progress, the technocratic paradigm contains the belief that there's a technical solution to all of our problems. We can think our way out, and that can be an excuse for avoiding conversion. Rather than change our behaviors, promoting the right relationship, we try to use technology to create a situation in which we can have our cake and eat it too, so to speak. Again, I think of Leonardo Boff's description of the integrated person which he finds in Francis of Assisi. For Boff, the modern period has become a time of the dominance of logos, which, in his understanding of the ancient world, was meant to be in balance with pathos and eros. Logos is the domination of reason. It allows for science and technology, rationality and materialism. These are not necessarily bad in themselves, except when passionate creativity, or eros, and compassion, or pathos, are eliminated. The loss of communication, meaningful relationships, and a symbiotic relationship with nature, logos is reduced to analytical instrumental reason and leads to domination rather than the simple use and enjoyment of nature. Productivity dominates, consumerism is born, and when basic needs are met, new needs have to be created. For example, what happens when a remote village gets electricity for the first time, or cell phones? Perceived needs increase dramatically. Boff asks, what does one do after winning the battle against hunger, having satisfied one's needs to the point of nausea? Having reduced the meaning of existence to the satisfying of our needs, once they're met, one doesn't know what to do next. Pope Francis would suggest the needs of the hungry somewhere else should be addressed. But according to Boff, the solution is not irrationality, although that might appear so in the United States today, but putting reason back into its proper place and balance. Feeling, pathos, comes before logos, but is not in opposition. Sympathy means feeling with and has to do with primary relationships. And eros, which is not limited to sexuality, although that is a major expression of it, eros is that force of enthusiasm, joy, and the passionate search for completion, ultimately with God. Eros produces fascination, attraction, and enchantment. Gentleness, a characteristic of St. Francis, or care, a necessary component of fraternity, is the compassionate eros, capable of feeling and communing with the other. Giving more room to eros, creative spontaneity, freedom, fantasy, will guarantee a more human and integrated form of life with nature and with others. The struggle for life, work, and exploitation made the popular masses the guardians of the values so often missed in the industrialized technological world. Values like hospitality, collaboration, solidarity, respect for the sacredness of God, life, and nature. Eros can be selfish, we call it concupiscence. It should be disciplined by logos. St. Francis found the balance through penance, the price he paid for his gentleness. Eros, balanced by asceticism, demonstrated in care to the poor, the lepers, that expression of pathos, and extended even to Saracens, infidels, and thieves. How do we live integrated lives in right relationship to God, creation, and all? What implications do such right relationships have for the world of commerce and economics? Integral human development, which promotes human flourishing, requires decent work, just remuneration, and safe working conditions. When profit is the sole or highest motive, there's an obvious tendency to find the cheapest raw materials for production and to reduce labor costs as much as possible. The promises of a trickle-down economy never seem to materialize, the Pope observed, and many of the excluded are still waiting. Pope Francis argued for an economy that is based on the common good rather than one that excludes. He promotes the values of fraternity and cooperation in his companion encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, rooted in the vision, the Franciscan vision, of a more fraternal world. It describes politics in the service of integral human development as a noble vocation in service of a diverse society living in harmony rather than a pay-to-play system where only the wealthy have meaningful participation. In an economy that promotes integral ecology, people are first in value, ahead of profits. In such a system, there is room for the poor to be protagonists rather than, like the biblical Lazarus, waiting for the crumbs from the tables of the rich. Integral human development, according to Laudato Si, produces economies that can combat poverty, restore dignity, and protect nature. In the diocese where I live and minister, 40 of our 50 counties are in Appalachia, where the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth are heard together. Centuries of extractive industries, first timber, then coal, have devastated the earth and created bust and boom economic cycles, with most of the profits going outside the region or remaining in the hands of a very few. In 2015, the same year as Pope Francis' encyclical on creation was released, the lay Catholic Committee of Appalachia, built on the 40-year tradition of pastoral letters from the bishops of the region, and published their own pastoral letter. Their words make a fitting conclusion to this reflection. Taking a stand with those who are poor means taking a stand, too, for earth. For we know that both are deeply connected. What we do to earth, we do to the poor. And more, we believe, like Pope Francis, that earth is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor, abused and used up in ways that do not respect its integrity and limits. Earth itself is a kind of magisterium with its own authority that must be respected. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop, for a great presentation. You take your seat, sorry. I really found how you mentioned the valuing of moral progress, with how much we value the progress of industrialization. I thought that, I've never heard that before, so I just have a couple questions for you. Pope Francis often spoke about the throwaway culture, where people and goods are seen as dispensable in his writings, such as Evangelii Gaudium and Laudato Si. How can the canticle and Franciscan values help us respond to the described throwaway culture?
That's a great question. I think Laudato Si emphasizes that the Canticle of the Creatures celebrates all life and all creation. And if we celebrate all life and all creation, we take it as a gift. And what an insult it would be to throw away a gift from somebody that we love. So if we throw away the gifts from the Creator, or if we throw away people because they are no longer seen as useful, it's a true violation of the dignity that the Creator has given each one of us. So this is part of Pope Francis's vision of the integral ecology, the integral human development that is necessary. All are valued as gift.
Thank you. I would now like to, thank you for these insights, Bishop Stowe. And we will return to you soon. At this time in the conversation, it is my pleasure to introduce Father Ryan Thornton. Father Ryan Thornton received a PhD in economic thought from l'École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales and La Scienze in systematic theology from Pontificia University Antonianum, Rome. Father Ryan recently published the book Franciscan Poverty and Franciscan Economic Thought. Presently, he is pastor at St. Mark's University's Parish in Isla Vista, California.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you to Siena University for this opportunity. Robber goes into a bank, looks at the teller, raises a gun, and says, "Stick up your hands or you're all geography." The teller says, "Don't you mean history?" The robber says, "Don't change the subject." Our subject this morning, following Bishop Stowe's gracious introduction, is looking to the canticle, The Creatures, as providing some insight, in fact, a thread for a different way of looking at economics in the Franciscan tradition. The whole of the Canticle, The Creatures, is a poem, it is a prayer. It's bookended, that is to say, its start and its end is the same, which is God. Laudato Si, that main phrase that recurs, actually appears in the subsequent verses. Where it begins and where it ends is the same, with God. In the midst of that reflection on creation, which in many ways is the focus, humanity is present. In verse 2, where human beings are mentioned in relation to their ability or inability to worthily even name God, or in the ways like in verse 3, about how brother's son gives us light. But eventually, people do come into the scene. There's what we can describe as an anthropological turn in the canticle. This moment where there is something different, where humanity takes center stage. That's in verses 10 to 13. Well, what about human beings exactly? Well, we're going to work backwards. In verse 13, it talks about eternity. This is where Sister Death, Sister Bodily Death, makes her appearance. Then before, or eternity, then Sister Death, we then have verses 10 and 11. Here really is our central point, central verse to focus on in terms of capturing the thread that we can follow throughout our reflection. The key word that I'll focus on first is peace. Peace we can think of as an internal disposition, but really that's a secondary thing, meaning that when we're using it in an extended way from its primary sense. Its primary sense being something, in fact, external. And the way that we describe war versus peace, as these being opposites, these being antithetical. Peace here is a social thing. We have peace in relation to others. They are living rightly, justly with them in such a way that there is harmony. Harmony requires a multiplicity of things, multiplicity of instruments in an orchestra, and so it is that peace involves harmony amongst a multiplicity of persons. But then there is, as it's translated, the word crowned, incoronati. The crown is a symbol of power. It is a symbol of rule. It is a symbol of kingship, queenship. It is a political word. That symbol only exists within a political structure. Otherwise, just having a hat on your head is keeping the sun off of the top. Instead, a crown connotes politics, an organization to society, in a structure amongst human beings, which we call political. In Aristotle's Politics, he says that human beings are by nature political animals. The word he uses is politikos. Polis in Greek means city, and it means really community. Human beings are by nature communal animals, and they need structure in order to have harmony. But what is more, and here is our central word, is that there is an central element of pardon. What Francis writes, the turn to human beings what gives them, where are they at their best? It is when they pardon for love of God. This word, pardon, is a concept that within the Christian tradition has an economic connotation as well. Not just late, not in the 20th century, or the 21st century, or in the Middle Ages, but going back to Jesus himself. To see it, we'll just follow the way that it appears from Greek into Latin and into Italian, as these words, this concept, begins to unfold. The part that we see here from Matthew's Gospel is well known to all of us. It is the Our Father. When Jerome translates it into Latin, he translates it as the key words there, as debita and demissimus. Debita is where we will get in English our word debt or debit, but more crucially, debt. And when Jerome translates it with demissimus, he is capturing what it says in the Greek, which has two parts to the word. There is the apo or apho, which means away, and there is the imi, the going, or what Jerome does, the mito, the mittere, sending away. When in Italian, as that language develops, it gets rendered as perdoniamo, or eventually in modern Italian, remittiamo. The demittere is the idea of dropping something. You're going to drop this thing, whatever it is. We'll get to what it is in a moment. Or you send it back. You remit it. Both concepts, both words, both translations are trying to capture the afekamen. What it gets to in English, when we translate the Our Father, it is forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, which is rather fascinating because, as we'll see, we know that the idea of debt is an economic one. And yet our English translation that we pray, that we use on a daily basis, actually has an entirely different construct, not so much economic, but in fact legal. Trespass in our language, although when it was first translated, really meant to go beyond, from Anglo-French, trespassere, to pass beyond something. That has a moral dimension, but now in our language it really has this legal connotation. I went beyond the property line. I went beyond where I was allowed to go. I crossed a boundary that was not right. But as it is in Greek, the two words are aphiemi. This is the first word, forgive. This is the pardon. This is remittiamo. This word has an economic connotation, as does the second, in the following sense. In chapter 18 of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus will be asked by Peter, how many times must I forgive my brother? As many as 7 times. And in response, Jesus gives a parable. And the parable that he gives is about a debtor who owes 10,000 talents. It's always hard to do equivalence between ancient currency and modern currency, but basically 1 talent was equivalent to 6,000 days' wages, a denarius. So 10,000 times 6,000, when you do the math, even if you lived 1,000 years and 1,000 lifetimes, and 1,000 lifetimes of 100 years, and every day from the moment that you were born to the moment that you died on your 100th birthday, you would still not have paid off the debt. So basically, all of us in this room right now, we could not pay off that one guy's debt in the parable. And the patron forgives him. And then he goes and he finds another servant who owes him only 100 denarii. That is to say, 100 days' wages. Not insignificant, but it could be paid off. And he says, pay me back. He's brought back before his patron, who then says, I forgave you your entire debt. And that is the word that is used. Athiemi describes forgiveness not just in a moral sense, it actually describes forgiveness as it pertains to something like a debt. And in fact, in the Our Father, the word that is used is debt, debts, both in a moral sense of gratitude. We use the expression to have a debt of gratitude to our parents, those others who have given us something in life to which all we can do in some sense is say thanks. Or we have a debt of respect, whether it is to the bishop, to the president of the university, that in some sense they might know more than certainly I do, and I should listen first and speak second. Debt in that sense is real, and the discussion of how does that translate or equate into economics is an open one. But in the sense of something that's physically owed, that is something that has to be paid back, whether it's money or whether it is borrowing someone's cart, that is there too. They govern both. The definition of the word is understood both ways, going back to the original, going back even before the Old Testament, before the New Testament, to Plato and Aristotle. This word is there, debt. Now, one might think that expanding on this from the Canticle of the Creatures to Franciscan perspective, hearing debt and forgiveness, that the natural segue is to loan forgiveness, as has been discussed in the last 10 years or so. And you might think that that's where I'm going, but, fun fact, no. Loans, yes. Forgiveness on loans, no. Why? Well, we have to avoid anachronism, meaning that when the Franciscans in the Middle Ages or Renaissance, depending on how you want to define those eras exactly, their concerns, their language were not ours, nor were their concepts. So the modern practices of loans are something that they would not know and, based on their writings, not agree with. The idea that a loan would have, that loan structures would be established in such a way that you were expecting a default and therefore expecting to receive interest. If you set up a loan in that way, they would say that is simply not right. But similarly, we live in a time with economic structures that they did not know either. And so when we put the two together, we have to put them in contrast, and we have to take them each on their own terms, so as to be able to make critiques when appropriate, and comparisons when apt, and conclusions only when they're justified. And so when we're speaking of loans, which we will look at, we have to look at their medieval practice, how they operated in that time, which was substantially that you went to someone and you said, I want to borrow something material. You could also loan something for use, like a cart. But then you would need to repay it back within a certain time, in the exact same amount. In the case of money, or there's something like wheat, you obviously did not give the exact same coin back. You did not give the exact same wheat back, or grape. You would have used those things and then brought back to them the exact same quantity. And if you said, oh, but you have to bring something back extra, that extra is what they called usury. Our modern practice is obviously quite different, but our focus is going to be, well, what did the Franciscans do in their time in regards to this practice? Because what they realized is that money, specifically, was valuable in the form of capital. Francis was not like St. Clare. He did not come from nobility. He did not come from a landed societal class. He also was not poor in the sense that he was working the earth, that he was beholden to someone else. His father was a cloth merchant, and he was as well. On the Italian peninsula in the 12th century and the 13th century, you have the emergence of a middle class between the nobility with their land and those who worked the land. And this middle class, this merchant class primarily, had capital. meaning that they had wealth in a form that wasn't land and that allowed them to do business and make more money. And what they were searching for, as part of Francis's life, was more power. This understanding of capital as power, economic power certainly, is the backdrop, or even you could say the foreground, of Francis's life and the friars' reflection. In short, their economic reflection is predicated on the realization, explicitly or implicitly, that capital was powerful. And their rejection, the friars' rejection of owning things or even using money, gave them greater insight into this. But not only insight, a desire to help other people avail of that power as well, so as to lift them up. 200 years after Francis, the friars, Franciscans, will be establishing these organizations called Montes Pietatis. There were precursors before the 15th century, but really they take on their form that we call the Montes Pietatis in the 1400s, in fact, in the late 1400s. And what they were a means for people to obtain capital. So I'm going to give you an example, a breakdown of how it would work. This is a simplification, so if you want to know the full story, feel free to ask the question. But basically, they went like this. You knew that they were going to do a remodel of the Palazzo Pubblica in Siena. And you were a blacksmith. You had learned the skills, but you didn't have your own shop yet. You'd gotten your way in so that you understood how the trade was done, and you know that there was going to be a big project, this big public work was going to be undertaken, and you saw it as an opportunity to make money. But you needed tools. You don't have your own anvil. You don't have a working stove, and you don't have the capital to buy those things. But you'll know you'll be able to pay it back because you're going to get the job. You're one of the few. You've cornered the market, and you're ready to go. You just need the tools, which require capital, money. You don't have anything else that you can make a trade with, so you go to the Mons Pietatis. Mons is just the singular of Montes Pietatis. And you say, can I get 1,000? I'm just using 1,000 for ease. And they say, we can. We've looked at your application, and yes, there's an application process. You just need to give us something that is worth 10% more, in case you default in a year. You have 1 year to pay us back, we're going to give you this 1,000, but we're going to hold something that's worth 1,100 just in case. And the deal is made. And then you can go off. If you repay within a year, you paid the debt back, you get your collateral back, but otherwise it's forfeited. The purpose of these Montes Pietatis was charitable, meaning they weren't designed to make money. The friars were setting them up, and when they would organize them during a preaching tour, and they would go around and ask people to make contributions, sometimes from the leaders of the city, of the municipality, sometimes from wealthy individuals. The purpose of it was charitable, and its foundation was charitable, and you needed, as it were, an endowment to get things started, because where else is that capital initially going to go or come from? Where exactly do these practices, these institutions come from? Well, there were the practical creators, who also happened to be preachers, as I mentioned. There were preachers who were academics, who kind of had the intellectual apparatus behind them within their minds when they were advocating for these things. And then you had academics who had begun to reflect on these questions, these economic questions, the economic practices of the time, who could then articulate the principles that could be then preached and applied. Three that I'll cite for explanation: Bernardine of Feltre. He is the one who really sets the standard for Montes Pietatis at the end of his life, in his career. And then the third, John Duns Scotus, who we will look at in terms of his intellectual apparatus. But right there in the middle is the namesake of the university, Bernardine of Siena. He was the one who took Scotus's ideas, his principles, his writings, and put them into a form applied them for people on the streets of Siena and throughout the Italian peninsula that could then be built on by people like Bernardino Feltre, who actually created the institutions. In the Franciscan life, we are always receivers of gifts. And in those lineages, we're able to see how something develops. Looking then to where Bernardino Feltre, via Bernardino of Siena, got this perspective is Scotus, John Duns Scotus, a friar who died in 1308, principally taught at the University of Paris, and in his writing, in his teaching, in the commentary on the sentences, this is from his Ordinatio, he writes, "There's another transfer that is not completely free." Transfer, he means a good, something is given from one person to another. But is where the one making the transfer expects something equivalent to that which they transfer, and it's properly called a contract, contractus, because the wills of the parties are drawn, trahuntur, together. This, he is contrasting a transfer that is not completely free, this could be buying, selling, lending, with a gift. That's the type of transfer that's free. Nothing is expected in return in a material form. And when people come together, what they do is they contract. They tie their wills together saying, this deal is what I want, and the other person says, this deal is what I want. For the one person is drawn to make a transfer to the other by the benefit that they expect from the person or what they expect to be transferred to them. In other words, they see something that they desire, and they see not just that, but they see a benefit coming to them by being able to borrow the horse, by being able to receive the wheat, and they go in for it. They make the choice. We can use the big term, it's a voluntaristic basis for exchange, meaning it's about the will. It is about a choice. It is not about a calculation. It is not primarily about the intellect. Those things are there, but what actually makes a contract is that you and I choose to make a deal. And so, in that, he adds, it is difficult for there to be contracts among people in which those making the contract do not intend to mutually remit to the other something from that individual point of justice, with the result that inasmuch a certain gift is mixed into every contract. And if this is the method of those making the exchange, as it is founded on that law of nature, do unto others what you wish done to you, it's quite probable that when they're mutually satisfied, if there are any deficiencies from that justice, they mutually will the remittance to the other. As he sees it, as he breaks down all types of exchanges of this kind, all types of not completely free transfers, meaning that they're not gifts, but they are free in the sense that the people have chosen, is that what they ultimately do is they don't say, I think I got the number exactly right. I think what you're getting is exactly equivalent to what I'm getting. Rather, they say, I think I'm getting a benefit from this. You think you're getting a benefit from this. And if we were able to, in some sort of perfect world, know exactly what the equivalent was between wheat and a cart, well then, we nevertheless give to the other whatever's lacking. So if you've ever tried to make an exchange of money, and the bank will tell you, okay, we're going to lock in this exchange right now from one currency to another, but just let you know there can be minute fluctuations, that's what he's thinking of. He's saying that in that moment of making the exchange, the parties are saying, if there's a difference in strict justice between what this equals and that equals, I remit it to you. I give it over to you, because if the roles were reversed and I was getting less instead of getting more, I would want the same for you. That is the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. And the phrase, the word that reappears is remittere. It is long that line that we saw before. Scotus's analysis is not just as the will explains the act, how people choose. I'm choosing to do something, therefore the will has to be involved when I make an exchange, but it also is the will that ultimately determines what is equal in that particular exchange, all things being equal. And it entails the idea that if there's a little bit of a difference, I return it. I return the difference to you. And so drawing then that line as promised from remittere to dimittere back to afikamen, it is a sense of forgiveness, of being able, a willingness to let something go that otherwise one could demand, in a spirit of the gospel, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. Not to demand exactitude in all things, but to be able to operate with a certain latitude, so that all people in a given exchange somehow benefit. Each one, to some degree, gaining something in the exchange, because actually that's what happens when we come together as a community, as people. Each one gives as each one gains. But then going forward, the question before us, which is the natural one, the questions before us, which is the natural one for gathering like this, is then to say, how, in our time, in our place? Where does this line take us from the gospel through the Montes Pietates, through this economic reflection? What does it inspire us to do? Well, one question we could ask ourselves is, what would an economy look like that was predicated on the golden rule? One that really asked and operated on the principle, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or if that's too abstract, it's too big a question because it's talking about an entire economy, which is a huge, huge concept. Perhaps more specifically, more simply, what practices or systems might be proposed based on the golden rule? Because that's what the friars did in the 15th century. They didn't just ask people to give money. It wasn't just about pure charity. There is a place for that. Rather, what they were proposing was an alternative model, the Montes Pietates, where people could benefit on the whole, institutionally, more broadly. And it was based on a real analysis of economic behavior and principles of justice, of right and wrong. It wasn't solely based on scripture. It wasn't solely based on philosophical or economic analysis. It was a combination. It was grounded in reality while nevertheless looking to a horizon of justice. And so, for you, what's the area? What's the practice that you would want to see changed along these very lines? And how would you do it? How would you modify it? How would you change it for the good, the common good?
Thank you, Father Ryan, for that wonderful presentation. And I want to start off with something that you're asking all of us to consider. You ended your presentation asking us to come up with some ideas for economic practices or systems based on the Golden Rule. As a constitutive of a fraternal economy, do you have some examples from your own career or experience?
Thank you. There's at least two examples that I'll propose. One is, as Leslie said, my daytime job is being a pastor. I get to do academic things as a side hustle, as they say. And our parish, like many parishes, is poor. And so in terms of doing a building project, I have had to go to institutions within the church and basically ask for a loan. And the type of loan I've asked is for a year, but with no interest. And to say, can you give me a year with this capital? I will pay you back in full. I just need time to get the donors. I need time to get things in order. But can you just give me this money, this capital, without expecting more on top of it? That is the type of loans that were considered just loans in the Middle Ages. They were the loans that were being done by the Montes Pietatis, an idea of, okay, we will extend this capital to you on your word that you will pay it back in time. I think this would be very helpful for many institutions, many parts, organs of the church to look at in terms of helping one another out. If pure charity is not possible, can just a little bit of money with a little bit of time and the promise of repayment. And the second is the example I can use that I think is worthwhile for institutions, educational institutions, to look at is the following. So there are some schools in California that the students have to pay a significant amount of money, $100 in fact, it's more, but I'll just say $100, as a student service fee that then goes to the student government. And so when you have 20,000, 25,000 students, this ends up being $2.5 million. And the student organizations, well, they apply for that from the student government and they'll get approved for it. But the student government, that organ of the university, can take months to process. Meanwhile, if they miss their tuition payment by a week, they get some very, very harshly worded emails. So my challenge is, why does one organ of the university, the department in charge of tuition, demand exactitude on payment, but then another, when it's the students who need the money, you can wait another week, or another month, or another quarter. It doesn't quite seem right that the one standard wouldn't apply to both. Either tuition can wait a quarter, or reimbursement can be paid in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Hi. I just have another question for you. Bishop Stowe, hearing these ideas from Father Ryan, what advice might you have for young people to bring these ideas and this vision into their own life?
Another great, another great question. So if we think about, instead of just trying to make money from somebody else's situation, but we enter into this idea of sharing and with repayment, I think that can be very practical in a number of ways. I think about a professor of economics, or actually a professor of business at Notre Dame, a Holy Cross priest, who told his students that because of their educational gift, because of the reputation of the school and the prospects that they had for hiring, that each of them should think about how much they needed to live on and give the rest away. And not many people took him up on that offer, but those who have, and he knows a couple that he can name, are very happy because they've done so. And he puts on a symposium, something like this, every year from the gift of one of those students. So if we think about the common good and how our success can help other people without diminishing our own needs or our own survival, I think that's a way forward in an economy that would really be more just and certainly more fraternal.
Thank you. And I just have one more question for you, Father Ryan. What do you see as the biggest challenge to implementing and embracing a vision such as this one? And how can we leave here to take action in the face of this challenge?
In many ways, the biggest challenge is the response, well, that's just not how business is done. You're never going to sell that because that's just not going to make anyone money. We just don't do it that way. In some ways, the biggest challenge is to say, well, just because that's the way business has been done doesn't mean that it should continue to be done. The biggest challenge is a resistance to change. That's why a place like Siena University, with its business school that has another framework, that has another paradigm that it uses for business, is so vital. Because, in fact, it can't just be about dollars and cents and what makes the most money. That mentality, insofar as it needs to be changed, is the greatest obstacle, that it's not just about profits, it's about people. But when you say taglines like that, even when they're well-founded principles, even when they are rooted in traditions of economic reflection that are centuries old, you can still get dismissive scoffs and laughs. Because it is a totally different framework. And yet it is the framework that we're here to reflect on, support, and find ways to implement even in the face of such skepticism.
Thank you. And just like Bishop Stowe just said, there are benefits to it, and we can see that with stuff like at Notre Dame. So I think these are very interesting ideas. Do you guys have any last things you would like to add?
Father Ryan, I'd be interested in your thoughts about when people talk about change and whether change is possible in moral theology, and some argue that nothing can ever change. Usually the counter argument is that usury was condemned as sin and then all of a sudden is accepted, and then more than accepted is the basis of a whole capitalistic society. What do you think about, is usury a sin, and how does that fit into your scheme of how economy could work?
I think this is one of the actual great untapped areas of moral theology. Because in the Middle Ages, Bernard of Siena, John Duns Scotus, Thomas Aquinas, all of them agree that usury is wrong. And in fact, Bishop Stowe, even more, they're saying that it's against the natural law. So if these theologians were right, then the usury prohibition could never be changed. It's not one of those laws that can be changed or reinterpreted by the church. It is supposed to be universally true. And yet now it would seem that the church is not only tolerating it, but accepting it, because in many dioceses, effectively, a loan with interest is practiced, which by the medieval definition is usury. So the question is were those theologians wrong, or were they right? And what does that then mean in terms of the church's practice or understanding as to the moral rightness or wrongness of usury? There's going to be a lot of need to define things. And Pope Leo in 2025 gave a speech condemning usury, but in his speech he didn't define it or put it in the terms of natural law, moral law specifically. He just said usury is wrong, but it wasn't necessarily clear whether he was speaking of usury in the contemporaneous sense of just being an exorbitantly high rate of interest, or in the traditional sense of demanding anything back on a loan per se. And so this, you've rightly identified, is a very valuable locus for reflection, not just on the question of loans, but even in Catholic moral theology as to what can and cannot change, or what has or has not changed in regards to church teaching on a particular subject.
Thank you. I just have one final question for the both of you. Going into or graduating for us as Siena students, do you think we have the ability to change these business practices that have become so common?
I think it would be quite challenging, but certainly a valuable experiment. It's easier to do if you have some kind of cushion to be able to do it with, and a landing pad. But I think we come to the point where we recognize that the system the way it is doesn't work. So if we look at it as the Pope Francis and now Pope Leo look at it in terms of global debt and who owes what to whom, and the inability to ever repay that, and the suffering, the human suffering that it causes on that macro level, or you think about something like payday loans in poor neighborhoods where people are charged exorbitant fees just to cash their work checks or to buy bread for the next week, and end up indebted because of that. I think we can recognize the system doesn't work. So how do we go about changing it? It's not going to be an individual, right? But if there's a collective that's working towards a recognition that the current way of doing things is just not just, then I think there's hope.
Thank you.
Precisely. There has to be hope, and I believe that you as Siena students can do it. And what is more is that it's a great question to lead into the subsequent talks, where the presenters will offer examples of where change has proven possible, not just conceptually, but what they themselves have done. And in this regard, we can take stock that not only is there a structure, an intellectual apparatus there, but there are even modern examples, so that the Montes Pietates aren't just a nice story that you heard from Friar Ryan in the morning, but you can actually hear now real examples of where change was possible, it was done, and now people have benefited from it.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we are out of time. Let us thank Bishop Stowe and Father Ryan one more time. Please stay around for the next event, Societal Impact and Integral Community Development, a Dialogue, which will begin in about 10 minutes. In the meantime, there are refreshments in the rear of the MAC. Thank you.
You up there?
How about Kirsten and I sit? How about Kirsten and I
We're
sit?
going to begin the session in about 4 minutes, so if you could move forward, please. The best seats are in the front, I'm told. Absolutely the best seats. You can hear everybody, you can see everybody. So please move forward if you don't mind. Thank you and welcome.
I'm sorry? What time? Right. Ava and the rest, so, after the introductions and everything, maybe like 5 till noon? How about noon? Yeah, so when Kirsten and I wrap up, I will invite the remaining panelists. I know, it's gorgeous.
Very nice.
You've been requested to sit here. No, yes, we're using the mics. They will. I don't know if they're on. So, I am going to. I thought Rashmi. So I am going to, after Rashmi introduces. I'm just going to say. I'm going to read your bio. There was a little wires across the front. She was going to do it. I was. So I will just read your bio. That's on the scene. And then some quick, just a quick general overview. And then we'll try to wrap up on you so that the other, and then we'll have the other panelists come up. Good. Yep. I do not have the. Oh, who's got the clicker for the slides? Where is the clicker for the slides? I don't. I have not been. Hey, Josh. I have not. Nobody has given me any information or anything. I just knew who was going to be here, what time I needed to be here. So. Here comes Michael. Yeah. So, okay. Okay. So, this will be the intro slide. And I'll introduce you. And then we go to that. Yeah. So this will just follow. So, you'll be able to see. Right. Okay. And then when it comes time for you to, when it gets to, this is just me. Yeah. I've got the unintended consequences, complexity science. Okay. So, I'll hold this to the intro, and then when we get past the intro, I will. And that's the form. Very simple. Yep. Yes. So that'll be my intro, then we'll go back to that slide, and then I believe so. Yes. Great. It's never the way, it's never the way. Yeah, no, going from physics to management is, yes, already. That's to be expected. Yeah, nice to meet you. I like the last question. Depending on the time, because this is open-ended. This allows you to talk about your work. Sure. Right. And then that'll be no. Okay. Now, we literally, okay, so I'm fully aware of this problem. Not because I believe my wife and I have a giant, we have a tote bag of stuff. We have about 5 of them. Yeah, I know. No, thank you. I mean, if something was something's part of it. Oh yeah, no, we found a poster for it. I know. I know.
Well, good morning again to those who, perhaps some were here earlier. For those who are new arrivals, welcome. Welcome to the second annual symposium, Earth's Cry, Humanity's Call. I'd like to now, if everyone could take their seats, please, and I'd like to welcome the Dean of the School of Business, Dr. Rashmi Asundani. Rashmi, please, you're welcome.
Thank you, Brother Perry, again. Thank you to all of you to be with us here today. For those of you who were with us in the previous session, it was fantastic. My 2 takeaways from the session this morning, which is a lead up to the current panel and the conversation that we're going to have today. What I heard was there are choices we make, and we have the agency. There are choices you make, and you have the agency to make the change. And the question that came up was, what are the practices and systems that we could design to advance common good, and that there is hope? And with that, we're getting into this session on societal impact and integral community development, a dialogue, and it is my honor and privilege to introduce my faculty colleague, Dr. Erin Pasiri. Erin is professor of economics at Siena University. He has been awarded the School of Business's Excellence in Research, Teaching, and Service Awards. From 2016 through 2018, Erin held the Douglas T. Hickey Chair in Business, and in 2018, he taught at the Centre d'études franco-américaines de management. My time in Montreal is coming handy with speaking this French. In Lyon, France, under an Erasmus Plus fellowship. In addition to a variety of academic journals, his research in empirical macroeconomics and political economy has been used by the Congressional Budget Office and the International Monetary Fund, and featured in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Harvard Business Review, the Baltimore Sun, the Huffington Post, US News and World Report, CNBC, MSN Money, and Yahoo Finance. He's a regular panelist on Northeast Public Radio's WAMC 90.3 Current Events Roundtable. Erin Pasiri.
Thank you, Rashmi.
So I want to start off by saying that this is a wonderful conference, and I want to thank everybody who's been involved in the planning of this, because it's rare to have an opportunity to talk to somebody who's very accomplished in their field in depth, and not just talking about sound bites and getting little snippets of what they do. So Kirsten and I are going to have about a half hour to talk in depth about what she does, how it relates to community development, and most interestingly, I think, is that it's a direct and concrete application of a lot of the Franciscan values and the Franciscan mission that you can see applied in the real world. So before we get on to that, I'd like to introduce Kirsten. So Kirsten Moy is a senior fellow with the Aspen Institute. Her most recent research initiative, conducted for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco as a visiting scholar, focuses on the application of complexity science to community development. Until June 2014, she was the Director of Scale Initiatives for the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute, where she was the project manager for the development of 2 national platforms focused on achieving scale in the nonprofit industry. She came to the Institute in 2001 after serving as the director for the Community Development, Innovation, and Infrastructure Initiative, a national research project on the future of community development and community development finance. Kirsten also served as the first director of the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, a program created in the U.S. Department of the Treasury under the Clinton administration to provide capital to community-based financial institutions, providing financial services to communities underserved by traditional financial institutions. Prior to joining Treasury, she designed products for pension funds and other institutional investors to invest in affordable housing and other community development initiatives. She is the co-author of From Distrust to Inclusion, Insights into the Financial Lives of Very Low-Income Consumers and New Pathways to Scale for Community Development Finance, among other publications. So, please welcome Kirsten Moy. So, my first question is an exceptionally broad one. One of the themes of this symposium is reimagining the economy for people and planet. And that's an incredibly broad question that has probably thousands of different answers. But from your perspective and from your professional experience, what do you see as the best way to accomplish that?
Yeah, it's a pretty broad question. After listening to this morning's session, I realized that what I had to say, even though it's bringing in some new science and so forth, was beautifully following what was said this morning. And I know that shouldn't be a surprise, but sometimes it is. You know, a conference is a group of non sequiturs. So I'm going to add to things that were said this morning. I think if we want to do more good, I think one of the first things we need to remember is that we're all connected. Everything you do has a consequence. Sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's bad. And the world we live in is so complex these days that we often don't know what's in our world. We don't know what's in our ecosystem. So it's every bit very likely that whatever you do will have consequences beyond what you're thinking about. And part of the challenge is figuring out enough about your system and knowing how to do things that you don't cause a lot of unexpected harm. Okay. The other thing that I really liked when the bishop spoke was he talked about the poor being protagonists for themselves. So often in the history of development, community development especially, we try to do things for people, we say, or maybe we're doing things to people, as someone pointed out. And they should be their own leads. They should be their own protagonists and leaders in their efforts to do redevelopment. I mean, today, I think the common way to say today would be that those closest to the pain or the problem are the ones closest to the solutions. And that would make a huge amount of difference, I think, in the way people worked.
Okay. Kind of building on that, you've written extensively about unintended consequences. So first of all, can you explain what that means in the context of community development and how other social investors and capital investment can better anticipate and avoid those unintended consequences when they're designing programs that are trying to do good?
Okay. So this is a big question, and it's really important. We create unintended consequences all day. So first of all, there's no official definition. It's just something that happens as a result of something you did that you didn't anticipate. Okay. And a friend of mine were thinking about this, and we decided we should organize them somehow. So we came up with 3 different categories for unintended consequences. The first one is what we call the coulda, shouldas. You could have known or you should have known. If you'd done your homework, you would have known, and you wouldn't have had this unintended consequence. One example is the tote bag problem. I assume you may have read about it in the New York Times, I don't know. When well-intentioned people decide to switch to cotton, right, tote bags as opposed to producing on that plastic, well, anyone that's ever produced cotton knows it's heavily water intensive, which is not necessarily a good thing for the third world countries where these are produced. And there was an assumption that we'll get one tote bag and we'll use it for 10 or 20 years. Okay, how many of you have only one tote bag? Okay, well, I personally have bags of tote bags, and even you get them when you come. Luckily, no one is giving them out here, which is
I don't think so.
A good thing.
I hope not at this
All right.
point.
There are scientific organizations, one of whom I've cut off from funding because they offer tote bags as an incentive when they should absolutely know better. All right. So I think that, and then sometimes the harm is greater than a tote bag. In the 90s, there was a lot of tree planting in the US and Canada to replace old forests. And what the tree they selected, a tree, was a highly flammable tree. And they planted monocultures of these all across Canada and the US. Well, you wouldn't be surprised to hear there were terrible forest fires, catastrophic forest fires. And maybe somebody should have known or could have known about that. Okay, that's the coulda, shoulda category. Then there are the bad actors. Okay, and we're talking today a lot about what to do in the face of bad actors. I don't know how many, I don't want to single out anybody, but how many corporations you've heard said, well, aside from we couldn't have known about that, and they did, or we're not responsible for that. That's outside our system. And I'm here to say everything's connected. If you do something that affects something, it's in your system, and you're responsible. You know, actually, you're responsible to see that it doesn't cause harm. It's not just indebted in the way you think that people have to prove they were harmed. You should have been the person proving it in the first place, right? And then there are some what we call the real deals. The world is truly complex. So there are things that no matter how much research we did, maybe we even did some trials, some trial simulations, we couldn't figure it out. And then we need to take our time. There are awesome computational tools, simulation tools to try to figure this out. And we need a little humility because we won't always be able to figure it out.
Let me ask you a follow-up to that. So has there been a specific project you've been either directly involved with or have observed, aside from the tote bag problem, where you were allocating capital to this community to promote, I don't know, investment in health centers or something, and you got the exact opposite result, or the result was not at all what you intended?
Yeah, actually, there's a very personal experience. I live in California, in a community called San Leandro, which is near Fruitvale. I don't know if any of you know about it from some of the stories about a low-income community. Fruitvale is a transportation hub for BART, for our system, and it's also where a group, I won't mention their name because they're basically good people, have tried to build a lot of affordable housing. Near this spot was a little community mall with, convenience services, not fancy stuff, but convenience services. And the nonprofit group lobbied and got larger and larger allocations of land in that area so they could build more housing. That was a good thing. That land used to be parking for that community mall and parking for the commuters who who got on BART that morning. So as the parking disappeared, the ridership went down in BART, and some of the businesses lost customers because people had no place to park, and some of them ultimately went out of business. So this was a matter of competing things. Maybe you could have seen it if you were a parking analyst. You could have seen, well, you need a certain amount of parking. If people can't park, they won't come. But that's what happened.
Another question, something else that you've been exploring, is the application of complexity science to community development. So I'm sure a lot of people in here don't know what complexity science is, but in terms of economics, this is a relatively new and upcoming field, and economists who are decades behind other sciences in terms of adapting new methodologies like to discover it and then claim that they were the ones that were first there. So can you explain, first of all, what complexity theory is and why you believe that community outcomes can't be engineered from the top down, and what that means for traditional grant-making opportunities?
This is the only place we're going to have slides, okay? But before, could I ask for a show of hands about some things? Yeah. So I don't know how many people technically have heard about complexity science. Okay, there's some people here, okay. Now let me try a different question. How many of you have heard of 6 degrees of separation? Okay, networks. Tipping points. Okay, you're in a lot of people business school here, 80-20 rules or power laws. Okay, so you know about complexity science. All of that is based in complexity science. And it's actually, I like to show slides too, even though I'm talking, because then you can get the information, in 2 ways. But complexity, it's not a new science, okay? It's basically a multifaceted way of looking at a problem or an issue from a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different angles, because life is complex, all right? So among complexity scientists, they don't call themselves that. You'll see a lot of physicists, computational people, biologists, chemistry, economics professors, are often there. And it's just a way of looking at all the facets of a situation or problem to see how they're related, all right? And it officially, one of the first complexity science institutes in the country is the Santa Fe Institute. But the term, this concept was around even in the 50s and 60s, even though it wasn't called that. Okay, next, if you don't mind, yeah.
Nope.
Okay, is it still on? Okay. These are some examples of complex systems. And if anyone here is in biology, you probably know this already. Ant colonies, if you're the human brain, the stock market, voting behavior, it's complex. How often do they correctly predict voting behavior? And you do polls here, okay? How often is Sienna right on polls, okay? You're pretty good though, all right. The World Wide Web, and then what we're talking about today, neighborhoods and communities. Okay, they're really complex. They're made up of large numbers of independent entities with no central control. Okay, in your community, who's in charge, right? There's no one person in charge, and that's a sign of a complex system. Okay, well, you've all seen flocks of birds. You can use complexity science to predict this flocking behavior. Scientists actually have done simulations with what they call boids. Okay, they create these imaginary birds in a computer, and they give them only a few rules, very simple rules. Some of you shaking your head, I think you already know this. What rules would you give a large number of birds to produce this behavior? You're probably too shy to speak up, but one of them is not to fly into another bird, okay? Another one is to keep with the flock. You don't want to be vulnerable as a bird on your own. You want to, another thing is to keep up, okay? And what happens naturally in a system like that is the lead bird gets tired, it drops off, and another bird comes. So there are never a lot of birds in the lead, right? And this is why you get a flocking behavior. But if any of you do computation analysis, you can try this out on your own. Next one. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have done operational diagrams, flow charts. You don't know how neat they are, right? Box, 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 arrow, arrow, arrow. A complex problem or system doesn't look that way. It looks like this. Doesn't matter what it is, it looks like this. It looks like a plate of spaghetti, as somebody once said. There's so many components, and they're related in so many different ways, sometimes in both directions, because there are feedback loops. And over time, things accumulate. So this is why it's not easy sometimes to figure out what's in an ecosystem. You probably have to look farther than you think. And then you have to try to figure out how it's related. Because if you try to do anything with the system, you want to know what's going to happen. And then I don't really probably need the next two slides, because I understand, because of the Franciscan theology here, you have something like ACE, which I was fascinated to read about. You're already working with the community. You already know that you're not saviors just coming in. So in the old days, probably the first definition of community development was the amelioration of poverty and the negative manifestations in underserved communities. Okay, that was back in the 60s. I think that's what they were using, all right? Community activists have talked about making their communities competitive for investment. So that's a more active sort of, thing. Advocates have talked about, building and sustaining their neighborhoods. It's a more dynamic, sort of thing. But let's go for the last two actually have to do with the community itself, collective action and emergence, and which is much more the way I think we think of community development these days. If you go to the next one, we've come up with a new definition of community development, which is that it's not something done to or even done for a group of people, okay? It's not that at all. It's a quality that emerges. It's the emergent behavior when there is sufficient social capital and cohesion in a community, and where the community has the freedom, relationships, and resources to take on their development. Doesn't mean they don't need help, okay, but it's a very different thing. You can't create community development. It has to emerge from the interaction of all the people there because they have social capital and cohesion and where they have the resources that they need. So, and I'll just say one other thing. Obviously, anything as complex as a community, you need to think about it in a systemic way.
So this is my one-dimensional economist mind critiquing this, and that is, I understand all of these things, but isn't just having access to capital, financial capital, an important component of this?
Okay, that's a setup. You know the answer to that. So for a lot of us that actually do community investing or social investing, many of us started a long time ago. I probably started in the 80s. And we used to think that. We used to think that we just provide the money. First they will come, and it'll fix the problem. And I belonged to a consortium of insurance companies in those days, all of whom had our own little programs. I was with the Equitable, my co-lead was with the Prudential, we had someone from Boston, Connecticut, and all that. And then we found out that the housing we invested in started to go awry somehow. We never thought about the human dimension. And anyone that knows about housing projects and the subsequent evolution knows that it's not just about the physical building, right? There's much more. It's about education, it's about health, it's about food in the community, it's about, green space. And you can't just solve the housing problem in the community by just providing capital. And not even just providing capital for multiple things. It's more than capital.
So does that imply that a bottom-up approach to funding is preferable or could be more effective than a traditional top-down?
Absolutely.
model?
That's a logical conclusion. In fact, I know this is about investment too. And something I learned after years and years of investing with insurance companies, with pension funds, at the CDFI fund in Washington, is that investors should actually take a humbler, more laid-back role. Okay, don't ever go to a place you know nothing about or a problem you know nothing about and just start throwing money around. Okay, I think the best way, what I tell investors these days is, first of all, don't do anything, go there. First, if you want to solve a problem, you have to learn about the problem first, from people who know, not just by reading books, but by people who are proximate to the problem. Observe what they're doing, and if you like what they're doing, it seems to be doing some good, support them. Don't do something of your own, support them. And then if you hang with them a while and they trust you, and you can see the natural next step, then you provide a little more capital. And you stay there a long time. You don't come in and out in 2 years. The usual 1 year, 2 year foundation grant doesn't cut it for these long-term complex problems. And then you have to think about sustainability. What will happen when you leave? You need to help that community develop the infrastructure and the sources it needs. Sometimes better than providing capital, I would say, is there's a nonprofit that helps new immigrants start their businesses in food industry in California called La Cocina. And they say, we actually don't provide capital to these folks. We lend them our social capital and resources. So they don't have the connections. For instance, if a chef wants to open a small restaurant somewhere, it probably doesn't have the relationship with the real estate developer who controls that property, right? La Cocina will go and negotiate for them for that space. So your connections and your social capital may be every bit as important, as the money.
So you talked a lot about some of the methodological issues, the issues that are that kind of guide the approach to it. So now that there's this background that seems to be kind of changing the dynamics of how people approach community development, what do you see going forward as some of the new approaches, the more promising approaches to community development? Are there any specific examples that you know of or that have been tried and have had some success?
Let me mention two. One in the way of implementation and one in the way of investing, okay? So there's something called multi-solving. Has that word come up for anybody? Multi-solving? Okay, so follow the logic flow. If everything's connected, okay, and everything you do has consequences, even to pieces and things that you didn't anticipate, all right? Sometimes maybe your unintended consequence is not bad, but it's good. It may do something, solve a second problem that you weren't thinking about. That's multi-solving. So for instance, I know one very well thought of community development group that did a huge project in Atlanta in a neighborhood. And they were going first for they knew it was all connected, but they didn't have the money to do everything at first. So first they worked on the housing, and then they worked on education, knowing that those two were heavily connected. They did not ostensibly, intentionally work on health or recreation or green space, right? But they noticed that whereas a number of the kids had been obese when they started this initiative, 2 or 3 years later, a lot of them, there was a lot less obesity in the community, but they hadn't targeted it. And they realized that the way that having people walk to school, more options for kids in school, all of that actually, and giving people a reason to be interested in other things, whatever, that people were actually, the kids were losing weight. They were becoming healthier. And they ultimately did do some directly recreational things, but this trend started happening even before. I would think that in most cases, if you look around, you could be more efficient, I'll use that word, with the funds and solve more than one problem. So there actually is a book called Multi-Solving that just came out by Elizabeth Sawin, S-A-W-I-N, who talks a lot about this technique. And more people are using it because we don't have that much in the way of resources. We have to solve more than one problem at a time. I think the last thing I would say to investors is that I'm sure all of you have heard about Mackenzie Scott and her, huge amounts of money she's giving, without freely and without conditions to organizations that she evaluates or people evaluate are good. So she's letting people on the ground take the lead. And not a lot of funders are doing that, but more funders are doing that. And even if it's not indefinitely like Mackenzie Scott is, but at least with, one particular project or something else, they're trying to give people the ability to lead in their own destiny.
A lot of economists, and trying to figure out how to say this politely, but it seems like over the past couple decades, maybe 4 or 5 decades, that economists have done a lot more harm to society than good, in that they have largely served the interests of the economic elite. They seem to have abandoned a lot of their core ethical principles in terms of how they're allocating capital, the type of policies that are being passed. And I hope one of the things that students and all of the attendees here got is that there are other stripes of economists who have a very different outlook on how economies can be shaped in different ways, where maximizing profit is not your moral compass. If you use profit maximization at the expense of everything else as your guiding principle, you will almost assuredly be led astray. You might become very wealthy and might rise to positions of power in political administrations, but there are consequences to that. And I think what Kirsten presented today was a nice, easy to digest way to understand how economists, the concept of investing, instead of investing, investment banks investing to maximize their own profits, talking about a different type of investing, a bottom-up type of investing that can benefit, different communities that have different needs and all of that. So, one of the things that I was really happy to hear you talk about were these specific examples of how economics and economic principles can maximize another objective outside of the profit motive. So, just to kind of wrap up, because I see we're running out of time before we move on to the next thing, in every economics class, you're taught that firms' main objective is to maximize profits. They have a legal obligation. Publicly traded companies have a legal obligation to their shareholders to maximize quarterly returns. That has led us down a very dark path, and I personally don't see a light at the end of that tunnel anytime soon. But one of the things you have as Siena students, business students, or even outside of business, particularly guided by the Siena's Franciscan mission, is to start tilting that dial and moving it in a different direction. So one final question is, if we, in an ideal world, if we were able to, you're never going to entirely abandon the profit motive, right? Businesses need profits to invest in new technologies, to pay their employees, all of that. But if you had to identify maybe 1 or 2 other core objectives that businesses and policymakers could follow as their guiding principle or their North Star, what would it be?
Wow. You really have a knack for asking these global questions. Well, I would say a couple of things. You're going to hear more about that tonight from Amy Dominy of the Dominy Social Investment Fund. She was one of the people that probably started social investing, and she'll talk about that a lot. But I think that there, again, in just research I've done and news I've been listening to, I think there are 2 ways that any funder or policymaker think about the use of capital, okay, if you're not thinking strictly about profit, all right? We did a paper some years ago about these CDFIs, these community development finance entities, and what sustainability meant for them. Okay, first we know it's not about making a profit, but we decided it was not even about them being able to operate without subsidy. Subsidy can be integral to your business model. All right, I mean, there's so many things that are subsidized. Why people, well, at least until now, subsidized public television and public media for years. There are things that every civilized country needs that may not yield a profit. And we as a society should contribute to that. It's a subsidy, but it's fine. It's fine. It's the way, why are they nonprofit in the first place? Because they don't make a profit, right? I mean, we need to keep that in mind. The other thing is that I'm sure you all read about what's happening at the Kennedy Center, and it's terrible, right? And I heard an interview by, I don't know who the new, not Trump, but whoever this guy is running the Kennedy Center now. He was giving a rationale for what they're doing, and they said, well, you know, they're not breaking even. They're not breaking even. They need subsidy. And so clearly, his inference was clearly they're not producing things that people want to see, or people would pay enough money to support it. This is a very strange way of looking at the arts, as far as I'm concerned. You know, that it has to subsidize itself, that only when you make enough money from ticket prices, you know, are you then doing something responsible. And this totally misunderstands the nature of what you're investing in. Right, so I would say realize what you're investing in. There are appropriate business, there are a lot of different appropriate business models, and subsidy is not a dirty word.
Well, thank you, Kirsten. That concludes the little fireside chat.
Okay.
Without a fire, unfortunately. But
Good timing.
so now what we're going to do is welcome a Siena alum and 2 current Siena students to participate in a panel discussion up here that will build on a lot of the themes we talked about. So, Katie, Ava, and AKM, please come on up.
You got it just right. You're amazing. You have to practice. Here.
Okay.
We'll share them. Okay. Why don't I let you hold the mic for a while?
Okay. Yes, we heard Kirsten talk, so she generously shared her microphone. Anyways, we can pass these around as needed. But so that was a very topical discussion, an in-depth discussion about community development and community investing. And now this panel discussion, I hope, will be a lot broader in terms of some of the topics, because we have people who are coming from different professional backgrounds. We have people who are coming from an entirely different point in their academic career. So it'll be interesting to hear a diversity of viewpoints about the broader challenges facing our economy, broader challenges facing society, facing individuals. So you've heard from Kirsten. You all know who she is. But we also have Siena alum Katie Nelson sitting here, Ava Green, Gear, yeah, and AKM alum. Yeah. So before we get started, why don't we start with Katie, and then we can work our way down, and just please give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my name's Katie Nelson. I am an alumni, so I graduated from Siena with my undergrad in 2015. I came back a number of years later to do my MBA. I graduated with my MBA here in 2023. So always excited to be back on campus with the School of Business, so thanks for having me. Right now, I actually work at Bank of America, so I sit right here in Albany. I am the market executive for the Capital Region Hudson Valley, which means a number of things. I wear a number of hats, but really the best way I like to describe it is the bank has this kind of overarching value that we call responsible growth internally. And so really like my role is to kind of carry that out at the local level. So that's growth, but it's also responsibility. So we look at how we engage employees locally, how we work with our community, And actually, prior to that, I worked at a United Way here in Albany on the development side. Kirsten had mentioned Mackenzie Scott. We were a lucky recipient of one of her grants when I was there, which was very exciting. She, very impactful philanthropist for sure. So yeah, excited to be here and appreciate the invitation.
AKM?
I'm currently a undergrad. Well, I'm blending with my undergrad and master's here right now at the semester. I'm an accounting major, and currently there's nothing else. Also, I'm just like working on research, especially towards like fraud and forensics, and like how that engages the what our community responsibilities are. So yeah.
Okay. Ava?
My name is Ava Gear. I'm currently completing my undergraduate degree and also doing my I'm also enrolled in the MSBA program. I worked with some of the professors here at Siena over the summer to do a nonprofit organization partnership working in health insurance.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to start with the same question that I started with Kirsten, and we can start with Katie and then just work our way down. The theme of this conference is reimagining the economy for people and planet. What do you see as the best way to, or what do you see as some of the best ways to accomplish that?
The hard question first. I think, you know, and like kind of reflecting in a lot of Kirsten's remarks, it's definitely a loaded question. But I think from my perspective, you know, from a business perspective, it's often good business to invest in the community, right? Like I think about a bank. I work at a bank. Banks ultimately make money when the community is thriving, right? When the economy is growing, when people have wealth, when people can invest. And so I think that there's a way to look at community development where it's not only the right thing to do, but it also, when done the right way, and as a whole and as a system, can actually impact profit in the right way as well. So I think the two can be linked in a way that is not often talked about.
So let me press you a little bit harder on that, making a harder question more difficult. Are there any aspects of community development in particular that you see either professionally or personally that warrant more investment or attention than others?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, like, when a business, you know, I think when a business is thinking about how, you know, what their strategic plan is or what their model is, there's often opportunities that align with that are directly involved with community investments, right? Like I think about a bank. There are 300 million plus unbanked people in the country. That's a huge market share growth opportunity, right? And that's actually doing good by investing in them, right? Giving them safe products to use, kind of meeting them where they are, trying to you know, remove some of those barriers as to why they're not using a bank. So I think that's one example. I think there are probably a number of examples with different industries.
AKM, in terms of, another way of phrasing that question is, what do you see as some of the most pressing economic problems facing the country that need to be addressed?
That's a very broad and general question, but I think for the community right now, I see a lot of I'm messing up the word, but there's a lot of apathy, especially towards the community right now, and genuine concern of like all these pressing issues, and they're just slowly chipping away at people's like empathy and compassion, especially talking about it more of an idealistic student. Just trying to cultivate compassion and a sense of empathy is right now a very pressing issue and concern, and just trying to reconcile like morality and ethics into that heavy stew of compassion and empathy.
That's an interesting answer because it's decidedly non-economic. Even though it has economic consequences, you're talking kind of more about the ideological composition of society and how we act and feel. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that, economics and, the material conditions that people face affect how they think, how they relate to other people. Ava?
I have sort of a different approach to the question. My experience in healthcare over the summer really made me realize people's lack of access to healthcare, especially in low-income communities and our neighboring communities and things like that. Not a lot of people know what is available to them through the companies that they work for or areas within their community, and I think it's a major issue that could help community prosperity and companies as a whole.
That's interesting because all three of your answers kind of address the same concept from a different point of view. Just since I'm moderating, I have the power of the mic. One of my things that I've researched a lot, and we see it play out with misallocation of capital, whether that's community investment or healthcare, but also how it affects a country's ideology, is the ever-growing degree of income and wealth inequality. And that really not only separates society physically, where you have people who are in the richest 1 in 10% really just isolating themselves from the rest of society. They don't experience the same problems that the rest of the population experiences. They have a disproportionate role in influencing politics. They have disproportionate roles in big money movements and so on. So I think addressing inequality would address a lot of these points, but that's just my opinion. Now I've got two specific questions for students, which is really just a spin-off of that. And there's no right answer to these questions. These are just personal observations based on what you've done. So you've heard a lot about problems the economy is facing. Anybody who's had a pulse over the past year understands that the world seems to be shifting in ways that might portend something of a darker future. So from a student's perspective, and we can start with Ava, as a student who's going to be entering the job market soon, what do you see as some of the biggest concerns that you have, either professionally or personally?
I would say, as a business analytics major, technology and innovation is obviously entering at an extremely fast rate, and learning how to work with that technology is definitely a huge concern that I personally see when entering the job market. A lot of the companies that I've looked at applying for, they use this technology to further their research, and it's not something I particularly have a lot of experience in because it is a growing industry, but I think it's very important to understand the growing technology in the world and the economic factor that technology has on companies and on students, and just really integrating that into our life for the better, and something that can be more positive for us as students and for the community as well.
AKM?
Could you possibly repeat the question?
What do you see as the biggest challenge for you as a somebody who's going to be entering the job market soon? What are concerns that you have about the ability to get a job, the ability to start a family, the ability to start a business? Take your pick from that.
All right, fair enough. So it's more or less the same answer she gave, which is as the industry is currently growing, so is technology, and sometimes it's a bit much more harder especially for for my generation, to like understand certain concepts or like pieces of technology and how that could further apply. I know I know like AI is currently taking a much more like is impacting the industry even more, and now we as accountants or as an accounting major or someone who's entering into that industry, is just like we also have to take into a factor of like how AI is going to factor into our jobs, especially with like it being able to like summarize pages of like tax regulations, audit regulations, and trying to comply with those that particular set of regulations. I hope that was like
That's good. Katie, so you're employed with Bank of America, and I don't know if you can, or how much you can talk about this because some of it might be proprietary, but are there concerns found that does Bank of America use a lot of AI? And you don't have to go into details about how it's used, but are there concerns or advice you could give not only the students on the panel, but all of the students out here about, somebody who's got a job with one of the big 5 international banks about how to manage all of that?
It's a good question. So technology has advanced so much. I was actually reflecting on that when I was thinking about coming here today. I was thinking about how I did not graduate that long ago, all things considered, right? 2015. And then when I went back for my MBA, it was 2018, 2019. And I remember sitting in my first MBA class with a notebook and a pen and looking around, and I felt like a dinosaur. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the only one without a laptop open right now. And so I just think about those 3 or 4 years and how much had changed. And I think as we continue down that path, technology keeps advancing. I think we were talking about AI 5 years ago, but it wasn't really as prevalent as it is now. So I think all these are really relevant topics. I think we're always going to need humans, right? We always, as a financial services industry, you always need that human guidance. You always need that brick and mortar. That's not going away. But companies are trying to kind of weave in, where digital can help enhance client experiences or enhance access to the community. So I think there's a hybrid of both. So I think the way that we and students can think about it is really embracing the technology, right? Getting to learn it, getting to understand it. Financial services industry is just starting to integrate it more into our systems, but we're using it in a way that's helping the human to guide a client, right? It's not in replacement, but it's how can we be more efficient so that we can be more client-facing, if that makes sense. So I think that the worry is certainly there, and I think that my biggest advice for students now is to just really try to understand it and get ahead of it, because I think that there's always going to be a world where you need both components.
Does that make you feel better or worse about your fears?
I would say much better, obviously. I think also going back to what Kirsten said earlier, we're all interconnected. So for someone in the professional field to hear you say that you also still believe the human connection is so important is very helpful and positive when I am thinking about entering the job market.
There was a recent, just piggybacking off of that, there was a recent study, and I'm not remembering what it was, so apologies, but they actually looked at the next generation and how they wanted to receive financial advice and how they wanted banks and financial institutions to actually meet them. And overwhelmingly, young people want to talk to a human, which I actually thought was very interesting, because I think that we have this perception that as generations pass, we want to go fully digital, and I think that that's just not the case when you actually look at the data and the numbers. I always think that there will be that human connection.
I don't want to forget you, Kirsten, because I know you're still on the panel, but this is largely a question directed towards Kirsten and Katie, and that, traditional finance is based on the concept of, if you invest X number of dollars, you expect Y rate of, a Y rate of return, so that, you end up making a profit. And I know, AKM, from personal discussions we had recently, that's also something of interest to you, about just, how traditional finance structures itself and how it perpetuates itself. And I know you're coming at that question from a different view. So I'd like to ask Kirsten, Katie, and then you, is that a sustainable model going forward? Is that a feasible model when you're looking at community investment in, say, poor and marginalized communities that might not have access to healthcare or might have education funding shortfalls? And, if you invest X to get Y, where Y is greater than X, if that's not feasible going forward, do you have any ideas about what could be?
That has at least three parts, like he always does this. So let me start with the traditional market and say that even in the mainstream capital markets, we no longer have certainty about what we're going to get. I used to work for an insurance company that did a very large number of guaranteed interest contracts, gigs. I don't know if they even exist anymore, where you buy up front and they promise you a certain rate of return in X years. Well, guess what? After years and years of stability, and we sold a lot of these things, the market started changing and became very erratic. So guess who had a major financial loss as a result of that? Because we had to still honor the contracts, but the background was no longer the same. So I think this whole idea of certainty has already gone, by the board. Returns are a lot more dynamic. So I think with I love that Father Ryan's discussion. I mean, what is debt, but what is a return? Okay, from a community. Is it just, if you're doing community investing, it's probably not just the interest rate that you're going to get, right? You want to see the community improve. You want to see something more than just capital returns. So that needs to be factored in. What are and they may be far more important, because you're not going to get huge returns, financial returns, from investing in what has been disinvested communities. What you really want to see is some transformation in that community. So I think, and even that is not easy to achieve, but I would think if you have concerns about investing in the future in communities, that should be more your concern, I think.
Do you remember the question at this point?
I do,
Okay.
yeah. Thank you. I think it's a long game, right? Like I think it's not fair to make an investment and kind of think you're going to get this automatic return, especially when you're talking about something so complex as Kirsten described kind of in our previous session, as a community or a neighborhood. You think about investing in the stock market, right? They always tell you it's a long game. Like it's in my opinion, very similar. Like I think it's, you're putting the community at a disservice to expect that you're gonna get this immediate return. I think often, to access funding and to get more money and resources, communities kind of form the solution around what's going to get them funding, and that's not necessarily the right way to do it, or like the way that they're going to ultimately get the best solution and the best return in the long run.
AKM, and in terms of traditional, and I'm going to set you up here, Western financial firms where you invest, you lend money, you take interests, you expect a return on that, you expect the payback. Is that an appropriate model, and do you think there are alternative solutions that, or alternative financial models that might be able to produce not only some economic returns, but also a greater focus on social returns?
So before I answer the question, I'm just going to give some background.
Please do.
I come from the Islamic faith, and the Islamic faith has many principles and rules regarding many things, from like how we treat our neighbors to like financial regulations and how we have to start businesses, and it always made sure to maintain an ethical and moral responsibility to not only ourselves but our community and our future generations. So personally, I believe that the traditional system of finance is not suitable for long-term sustainability, more or less because I believe that interest and expecting that there's going to be a return through monetary gain is kind of disingenuous, because it shows me that the intention is only just to make a profit, not necessarily like actually trying to invest back into the community and just trying to see the community just be better. Of course, I understand that sometimes it is a nice incentive to have, but it should not be the overarching goal, or the overarching goal of like, if I invest back into my community, I'm going to get some money back into this. I believe that there should be, when trying to invest it back into the community and making sure that community is better, that you more or less take that risk or that probability that, hey, this might be a failure or this might be a loss, but at least I did go out trying and doing my best of making sure the community is as great as possible. Something like that I usually go back to is like the Islamic Bank, of like when trying to invest into these local businesses, that the bank will also incur some of the risk, kind of acting like a private equity fund instead of an Islamic bank, or like a traditional bank is what I'm trying to get at. And then from there, the bank would obviously take some risk. And in the long term, it's a bit more rewarding and sustainable, because eventually the business, if it wishes to become an independent entity and become much more self-sufficient, and people start relying on themselves a bit more, then it's just better for the community overall. And it also has that core themes of like, well, like, it just reminds me of the quote of like, teach a man to like feed it. Wait, what's the quote again? Isn't it like something along the lines of like, give a man a fish, give a man a fish, feed him for the day, but teach him to fish, and he has a lifetime of like self-reliance, basically.
Okay.
But yeah, I think my answer addresses the question.
Oh, yeah, and I think that ties in interestingly to your original comment, or maybe not the original, but something you said earlier on about the level of trust and empathy in communities, and that, you know, existing institutions can intensify that mistrust and, you know, atomism, whereas what you're talking about might have the opposite effect.
Yeah, and just to add on to that is like that community, of course, the community link and that human connection is very vital and it's very important, but it's also very important to have that intention of like, hey, I really want to see my community performing very well. It's that intention of altruistic intentions, because in the long term it's much better. But if the intention is somewhat a bit off, if the intention is somewhat off of like, hey, I just want to make money, outside it's going to be like this nice apple where it looks nice, but it's somewhat rotten to the core. And when you take a bite out of it, it's gonna taste a bit funky. And then later on, like a couple of days later, you see it's somewhat rotted, and it's just like, yeah, again, this is not necessarily suitable for long-term sustainability.
Ava, did you have anything you wanted to add about just...
I think my fellow panelists did a very good job explaining their ideas, and I agree with what my peers said about just wanting and intentionally investing in the community without that expectation of return. And I think he did a very good job of explaining it and giving examples.
I want to make sure we leave some time to have our panelists give their personal experience and provide some advice to our current students who, are in the audience. So, we talked about a lot of detailed things, big picture issues, smaller, more concrete issues, but shifting gears, since we're starting to, get close to our time deadline, starting with you, Katie, since you're fresh out of Siena and in the job market, a lot of students here, particularly, it's not just exclusively in the School of Business, but a lot of students in all three, liberal arts, science, and business, want to do some type of social good. I would presume that's a major reason a lot of them came to Siena, whether they, wholly believe in the Franciscan mission or only parts of it, but, it seems, at least from, my 17 years here, the general gist is that, students want to do something good. But getting from here to, the outside world and how to do that is tricky. There's a lot of different things to navigate. So what has been your experience in getting from, Siena to Bank of America, and then giving the students in the audience some concrete advice that they can do, whether it's while they're at Siena, whether they're on the job market. You already talked about some skills that they could acquire, but just practical advice for the students who are sitting here today.
Yeah, it's a good question. Definitely resonates with me. I was a business student who was very interested in kind of the concept of corporate social responsibility, what that looked like in the workplace. I think, there are a lot of different ways to achieve that. And so when I was at Siena, it was my senior year, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was applying to a bunch of different industries, a bunch of different positions. And I had one mentor here who told me, you don't have to figure it all out right now. Find somewhere that you're surrounding yourself with really smart people, and you'll guide yourself from there and you'll learn. And I thought that was really the best advice I could have gotten, because I feel like I was graduating and I was putting the weight of my entire career on my shoulders. And you don't have to, right? You're gonna find your path. And so when I graduated, I did that. I worked at a company for 5 or so years. That was not my passion, but it was a great place for me to start. I was surrounded by a lot of really smart people who made me a lot better at what I do. And I was able to kind of find my way to make an impact there, right? You can get involved with your community through whatever company you're at, and kind of make your own path from there. So that would be my biggest advice is, everywhere needs good people, right? And you're coming from Siena, you're all really good people. So you can go a lot of places with that, right? No matter what industry, no matter what company, no matter what profession, they need, what do we say? The world needs more saints. But I think that's really true. I think everywhere needs good people working there, kind of moving the needle internally wherever they can.
I know I'm just supposed to be a moderator, but I had my own professional trajectory before I ended up here, and I want to build on something that you said in slightly different language, and that is, your first job is not a life sentence. You're coming out of college, you choose a major, and then there's all these job opportunities, and you're trying to figure out which one's the best. Most of the time, that first choice is not going to be the correct one, and that's perfectly okay. Understanding what you don't want to do, understanding that this might not be the right fit for one reason or another. It's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of growth. It's a sign of, okay, I tried this and it didn't work, so now what? And then you just kind of take a personal inventory and rethink what you've been doing and what you want to do. You talk to people, that can be very helpful. So you don't need to think that the first job you get, everything in your life is riding on that. That's just the smallest step in a number of steps you'll take throughout your life. So I want to turn this over to Kirsten, who's coming at this from a very different position, and ask you for advice that our students might benefit from.
So I was someone that got to where I ultimately wanted to be very indirectly. I was actually a science major, physics major, and trying to get into social problem solving. So it was a long trip. But I would say that I'd echo, your first job is not a life sentence, and I want to emphasize that whatever job you're in, you will learn something that will be useful to you later. And just to give you a crazy example, one of my first jobs out of graduate school was being an analyst at Nabisco. Do they exist anymore, the cookie company? All right, yeah. And I was able to use what I learned about new product development, okay? Later on, decades later, when I was trying to decide whether to make an investment in a new housing project in Harlem, all right? Because traditional analysts in real estate they just extrapolate what's already there, okay? The appraisal is basically extrapolating, looking at the history of what's there. And what if nothing's there? What if no one has invested in there in ages? And the analytical process is much more like new product development analysis than it was real estate analysis, okay? And the other piece of advice is that if you're not where you want to be and you have even a vague inkling of where you want to go, but you can't get a job there, go hang out with people who are in that profession, organizations. If there are happy hours with those people, volunteer, whatever, just try to spend some time, no matter how you get there, how indirect, with that area that you think you want to be in, and you might make some connections.
So I know the two of you are students and might not have any practical career advice, but you were chosen to be on this panel for a reason. So can you talk about things from your own student experience, whether it was classes that you took that you find to be particularly valuable, whether it's, classes you took, independent research, or just an overall philosophy to how to approach academics so that you're maximizing your chances of ending up wherever you want to be once you graduate. What have you found to be some of the most helpful ones? Why don't we start with Ava?
I would say, even from talking with Katie before, she mentioned how after she graduated, college kind of felt like this small little bubble, and it's so stressful while you're in it, and I know can be very hard to try and balance things and figure it out all out, but I think it's important that we take this time, don't take it for granted. It's an opportunity to learn and grow and take new classes that you wouldn't have thought to take previously. Over the summer, I worked with my professors for a non-for-profit company, and I had never considered non-for-profit before. I had never thought about health insurance or the health industry at all. As a business analytics major, you think of banks and financing and hedge funds and things like that, and working on Wall Street, and it really, I would say, opened my eyes to a completely different world that you can do with business analytics, and just the amount of opportunities that are out there for you that you really might not even be aware of, or an industry that you might not even know. And as Kirsten said too, like indirectly finding your passion. I think that my experience over the summer really helped me determine that I want to work for a non-for-profit. I want to reinvest in the community and align with a lot of our traditions here at Siena and the Franciscan values, things like that. So I feel like just navigating your way and trying to stay organized, but not taking for granted, the opportunities and the experiences that you get in college is really important.
AKM?
So much things I'm considering, but starting from my time at Siena, I got into the accounting program, and there were a couple questions that I did not know how to answer, and even with the 4 years, I'm still struggle to find the answers to some of my questions about ethics, morality, and how I can bring that into me how I can bring those principles of ethics and morality into the business industry, and sometimes I don't necessarily have the answers to those questions just yet, but I know through hope, faith, and just hard work that I'll eventually reach to the natural conclusion. But as of right now, I'm just trying to enjoy the time I have left, trying to enjoy the opportunities that Siena does provide for me in terms of classes, in terms of classes, independent research, to extracurricular activities, trying to do as much as I can with the amount of time I still have left.
Any other parting thoughts from our panelists? Okay. Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, AKM. And thank you, Ava. So I hope this was interesting in a variety of ways. I tried to make the questions as broad as possible so people could kind of latch on to whatever, random questions were pinballing around my head. So thank you all for showing up. And I don't know what is Michael coming up to announce whatever is next and what people should be doing, because I don't know. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to the panelists, most of all.
Well, as the students are running out, just to know there's a break now. There'll be lunch in various forms. And then from 1:30 to 3:30, there'll be a community exposition, job opportunities, people involved in advocacy for climate justice, and other programs will be in the zone just beyond the green curtain there. That's for the students. It's 1:30 to 3:30, so please come back for that. And then at 4:20, we will begin with the special guest, Amy Dominy. That's the main key session tonight. So please, it'll be here at 4:20 p.m. Thank you for your participation. Again, a round of applause for the panel. Thank you, Aaron, and all everyone.
Get the